So it's incredible to see its growth, and the energy in the building is obviously really palpable. I'm thrilled to be facilitating this panel, which I think is one of the most exciting gatherings here. We have two workers from the most exciting movements nationally in the country right now. And we have an incredible labor sociologist. We have a longtime unionist from one of our independent radical unions. So we want to have a conversation about what we've all been characterizing as this incredible sort of undefinable moment of a labor upsurge. It feels like a labor upsurge. We have some indications of that from Bureau of Labor Statistics data and NLRB data. But what does that really mean to be in a moment of upsurge? And more importantly, how can we take advantage of it? Are there historical lessons that can be drawn and applied? What can we as unionists, learning from one another here, take back to our home unions to challenge them and transform them to take advantage of this time? So I'll just do really brief introductions, although I think most of you probably know who all these folks are. We have Mark Minster here on my far left. He's of course from the UE Union, which is a radical independent union, and Mark has a lot to offer. He wrote a few years ago an article in Labor Notes about this concept of a labor upsurge, so we'll be hearing a little bit more about that today. Next to him is Kyla Clay, who was just in this room, so if you've been sitting here, you already heard her spiel about the Starbucks union. Kyla has been organizing in Boston area stores and is also a law student at Suffolk. Welcome, Kyla. Next to Kyla is Ruth Milkman, who is a labor sociologist at CUNY. She's written incredible books on feminist labor movements, labor across generations, immigrant labor, the precariat. So we're really happy to have Ruth's long-term perspective on labor history here. And finally, here right next to me is Derek Palmer from the Amazon Labor Union. I think from the sound of the clapping, you guys probably already know that Amazon Labor Union is an independent worker-led union, Staten Island, New York, that has won the first union in United States history at an Amazon plant of any kind. Right. So just to overview the agenda, so I'll just start with a few Q&As with the panelists to kind of set the ground. And then after that, we want to invite all of you guys to engage in Q&A. So write down your questions and get them ready, and then I'll run the mic over to you later on. So should we start with you? So I wanted to start with Derek and Kyla so we could just hear a little bit of the texture of their organizing. There's obviously been a ton of press on both of your campaigns, but it's nice to hear from you guys straight away. So one thing to start with, I think, Derek, is this notion of a worker-led union. You know, what has that meant to you guys? You guys made the affirmative decision not to go with an established union, but you also made the decision to use some traditional labor, tools like the NLRB election, for instance, to establish your union. So talk to us a little bit about how you guys made those decisions and what worker-led organizing means at JFK 8 Warehouse.
I can say about first of all, the power of workers organizing themselves is something that, we feel is like the new wave of organizing, really. It definitely helped us a lot. The fact that, like myself, I'm still an active Amazon employee. I've been with Amazon for 6 years. And I know a lot of workers in the facility, and I think that played a good part because now, traditionally, what happens is when you have union busters or labor consultants, as you call them, they're hired by the company to come in there and basically discourage workers from signing up or voting when it's time to vote. So now you have these captive audience meetings, which traditionally always have a strong impact on workers' influence. So now you have like people like myself and other workers of the ALU who are able to pretty much counteract what they're saying in these meetings, which speaks volumes. And, I was one of the first people to actually do that in JFK 8. And all it did was transcend throughout the different meetings that they had throughout the day. So once I started doing it, other workers started doing it. So now all these workers are wondering what's this about unions, because a lot of young workers don't really know about unions. So now after they engage, now we give them that education that they need, and ultimately that played a huge part. Also, the fact that we were holding barbecues outside, directly across the street at the bus stop, that helped out a lot, because now we're creating like a family-oriented environment. So now these workers are comfortable with even talking to us instead of just saying, here, sign this authorization card. Now we're creating a nice environment. And now, after that, they're able to actually talk about their issues openly, which is, they never get that opportunity to do that at Amazon. Managers aren't going to come to work and say, hey, like, how was your day? Like, how can I make your day better? So like this is coming from a genuine place, worker to worker. So now that direct relationship that we're having with them, it speaks volumes, and it's been helping out a lot. Also, the fact that we've been handing out T-shirts, that's huge, because workers were initially scared to wear these T-shirts. The more organizing that we did, during our campaign, now you gradually start seeing workers wear the T-shirts. They're speaking out, and they feel like they have a voice. So that's definitely important to have a worker-led movement. And I think moving forward, other Amazons that want to organize, they should definitely do worker-led, for sure.
And Kyla, your guys' union's organized a little bit differently. Starbucks Workers United, worker-led, but is sort of affiliated with a larger union, but maybe a kind of smaller part of a larger union, which has given you guys some freedom. Can you talk to us about that, the anatomy of that process?
Yeah. So I think for a lot of us, when we first started this, we didn't know much about what a union is. I'll be honest, I was Googling what is a union in about October. And so I think that, there wasn't really much of a conscious decision as to, whether to be affiliated or not. But there was always a conscious decision to make this worker-led the whole way through. So although we do have this affiliation with Workers United, we've been very fortunate to have it still remain partner-led. At Starbucks, we call each other partners. And so Workers United has primarily been support for us, with litigation issues, with making sure that we have resources, but they've been very much deferring to the workers throughout this process. So, as Derek was saying, there's, nothing like the power of workers organizing. I think it's this worker-led type of movement that cannot be beat. One of the ways that we've done this, too, is, a lot of the things that we're told by Starbucks during these captive audience session meetings, these one-on-ones, is that the union is a third party. The union is a third party. And during those captive audience sessions, I would tell our vice president of the region, Amy Tingler, I'd say, Amy, the union is us. Can you please call the union the baristas? And the reason that I say that is because throughout this whole process, it has been the workers who are making the leaflets. It's the workers who are filing the stores. It's the workers who are preparing for these captive audience sessions, getting their votes together. We really keep it within our hands the whole way through, and Workers United supports that, so that way we're able to be as successful as possible. But I think that the main reason we have been successful is because we've kept it focused on the workers.
Ruth, you've written a lot about generational trends in organizing, and I'm wondering if you have observations on, these two movements or other things that are kind of popping up in the news right now in the labor world. A lot of people have commented that they seem to be led by young people, that there are generational and sort of structural dimensions to why this is happening among young people. Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. Before I start, I just want to thank Tammy and the Labor Notes crowd for inviting me on short notice to replace Stephanie Luce, my colleague whose flight was canceled yesterday. So if you're expecting Stephanie, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm happy to be here in her stead. Yeah, the generational thing. Well, this conference is a pretty good illustration of that. I don't think there's ever been a Labor Notes conference skewed so much toward young people, and it's really wonderful to see. And if you were in this room for the last session on Starbucks, I don't know about you, but as one of the gray-haired people here, I was very struck by the, with one exception, the extreme youth of the panelists, and I think that's fairly representative of the campaign as I understand it. So what is this about? I've written a lot about this, like Tammy said, so I won't go on and on, but I just want to say that what we've seen, I think since basically 2011, or maybe since the Great Recession, starting with Occupy Wall Street, followed by Black Lives Matter, other social movements, and now a new surge of unionism, it's a generation that has kind of had the rug pulled out from under them in the United States with growing inequality, growing precarity of employment, growing student debt, on and on, all these things that collide with the expectations that now a few generations, I guess, starting with Gen X, millennials, now Gen Y, have been led to expect that if they went to college and did what they were supposed to do, the world would open up to them, and instead they end up working at Amazon or Starbucks and, you know, being treated very poorly by managers and all the rest of it. And, well, Stephanie and I and another colleague of ours, Penny Lewis, documented for Occupy the demographics being skewed toward college-educated young people. And I think we're seeing that over and over again in many of these waves of union organizing, starting with actually higher education. It's been going on for quite a while now. This is the extreme case. Graduate students, adjuncts, people with PhDs who are employed at the minimum wage or less to teach college classes, right? They're not easily intimidated by all the managerial BS, right? They know better, and plus, the jobs are not that great, so the risk of being fired is maybe not that strong. Now, that's especially true this year with the labor shortage. Unfortunately, that's not likely to last. Journalists, another example. The wave of teacher strikes, K through 12, were led by young teachers. Obviously, teachers are all different ages and all college educated. And now we're seeing it in these campaigns you just heard about and elsewhere, Apple, REI, and more, museums, nonprofits. All of them are, the leaders anyway, are young and highly educated. So to me, that is really important. And even at Amazon, I think the overall workforce maybe is not so college educated, but many of the leaders seem to be. I know, for example, of some of the African immigrants who work there, who've been active in the campaign, have PhDs or were journalists in Africa or whatever. So anyway, initially this whole phenomenon did not include unionism. That's pretty recent, but now it does. And I think the labor movement, oh, I'm sorry, you weren't hearing me? I'm so loud usually, sorry. Thank you for the prompt. Anyway, now this generation has the union bug, and it is remarkable because, you know, as Kayla told us a minute ago, what do they know from unions in many cases, right? But now it's spreading, and so I think, you know, this is a moment, and we hope it's the beginning of a major movement.
Mark, I want to bring you into the conversation to talk about this notion of an upsurge. As I mentioned, Mark wrote this fantastic article in Labor Notes that cites the work of Dan Clausen to talk about what a labor upsurge means, what the sort of historical moments of labor upsurge can tell us about labor upsurges. And I was rereading it, and I remember that you make 3 key recommendations in that article. More strikes. You need a large number of activated workplace leaders, and you need worker independence from large mainstream unions that may be risk averse. So, Mark, could you kind of take us through, you know, why you structured the article that way and who Dan Clausen is?
Sure. So Dan Clausen was a sociology professor and labor activist at UMass Amherst, and he wrote a book published in 2003 called The Next Upsurge. And there have been other scholars who'd written about this before, but this book really sort of popularized the notion that, you know, clarifying that unions do not grow incrementally. Unions do not grow sort of on a trend line that looks, you know, like this. Unions grow in big spurts when millions of people join the labor movement over the course of a short period of time. And he goes on to talk about some of the reasons why that is and some factors that might be, instructive for people looking at this. But one of the things he says is that you don't know you're in an upsurge when an upsurge is happening. You're not going to know until you look back 4, 5, 6 years later. And so we can't know if we're in an upsurge. The other thing he says, and this is, I think, true, is that you can't manufacture an upsurge. There's a whole range of all kinds of different forces, social forces, economic forces, political forces that go into whether something like that will happen. But you can look at upsurges throughout history. And the two big ones in the 20th century here were the upsurge in the 30s that built the industrial labor movement, and the upsurge in the 1960s and 1970s, where waves of public sector workers joined the labor movement. You can look at, and you can see this happens, the same dynamic in, all across the world, Italy, Spain, Korea, South Africa, Brazil, Chile. And you see some common factors at the beginning of those upsurges. So one of them is a willingness to take risks, audacity. Don't underestimate the importance of just being audacious, including the audacity to put forward really bold demands that go above and beyond what others in the labor movement might be demanding. You've got to be willing to lose if you're going to take risks. And many upsurges, are preceded by years and years of failed strikes. So, for example, in the 1930s, the big upsurge in 1936, 1937 was preceded by years in the early 1930s of huge, massive class battles that were all lost from 1930 to 1933. But people learned during those losses, and those people became, in many cases, the cadre that built the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the precursor to today's AFL-CIO. The second thing is strikes. You don't see an upsurge without massive strikes, and strikes that challenge labor law, that break labor law, that in many cases are not protected by any affirmative right to actually go out on strike. Union elections are not the thing that typically signals an upsurge. It's typically strikes. And one of the things you see is that those strikes beget other strikes. The militancy catches hold. And you see it start to spread. And you saw that in the 30s, and you saw that in the 1960s with teachers in New York striking, and then that catching on throughout the country and building a whole movement of teacher unionism in this country. Then the third thing would be what we just heard about, workers taking the process into their own hands. You can't have an upsurge relying on paid staff. Paid staff don't create an upsurge. An upsurge happens when millions of workers take the organizing process into their own hands and run with it and communicate it and transfer it to other workers who take it and run with it. You saw that with sit-down strikes, for example, in the 1930s. You often see new organizations develop, new networks, new formations, new federations, or you see really sharp challenges within existing organizations. But it's typically not sort of the mainstream of the labor movement that's in leadership, that's leading the charge during an upsurge, although they typically will get involved after. And then you see a big role of the left, whether it's the organized left or sort of the broader social movement left, in these upsurges. And so because you often aren't getting support from the established labor movement, the big unions out there, people who are politically committed to the idea of workers fighting in workplaces and building strong, powerful, militant unions, help out, and they provide resources, whether it's legal support or picket line support or organizing training or money or whatever it might be. You need that social force as a resource, especially when you don't have the full backing of the rest of us in the labor movement. There's got to be a center of gravity that exists separate and apart from the mainstream of the labor movement for an upsurge to happen in many cases. And so, you know, we've seen many of those factors at play here. You know, we've seen strikes at Starbucks, right? We've seen a new organization come to the fore at Amazon. You know, again, we've certainly seen workers take hold of the process. You know, there are some major obstacles still that we have to overcome to make this really, really big, but that's clearly what we should all be thinking about, I think, right now, is how we scale this. Because when you look at upsurges, there are individual people who did specific things at the beginning of all those upsurges that made it into an upsurge. You can't always predict what those are and whether they'll work, but it's the people in this room and the people like us who are going to make this moment become an upsurge.
So taking off from that, Kyla and Derek, do you guys want to talk about the direct action strategies you've been taking at your workplaces? Mark mentioned that a lot of Starbucks stores have gone on strike, shutting down business. That's been true in Kyla's area and across the country. And Derek, I know your guys' movement really started with these COVID protests and walkouts. So yeah, maybe talk about those direct action strategies and how they've helped build your organizations.
Well, the walkout that you're referring to that happened in 2020, March 30th, which led to Chris Smalls being fired and also other organizers. I mean, that's really it. That's how we got here, really. If you're thinking about it, that's the beginning of ALU. We just didn't go by the Amazon Labor Union. You know, we the Congress of Essential Workers. So yeah, I do agree that we need to take more, you know, steps towards striking and collective action. I mean, we've done that. Like, we've done marches to the boss's office, and you know, we always raise concerns. So that's what we're building right now, is doing these small actions and then turning it into large actions. And also right now, the pressure that we're going to put on Amazons across the country, you know, it's going to be big, because we have 100 buildings that have been reaching out to us and want to start organizing. So yeah. So that's how you really put the pressure on them. You get all these facilities to start organizing, and you know, what is Jeff Bezos and Amazon going to do when all 100 of the buildings are organizing? You know, so you know, this pressure that has never been seen before, and you know, we're proud to say that we're going to be the ones to do it, and you know, we're just going to keep fighting. And workers are getting empowered every day. I'm getting DMs, we're getting messages from these workers, and the country is awake now. You know, it took the pandemic for it to happen, but I think the country is awake now, and we're just tired of the bare minimum. You know, now it's time to really fight. And you know, as you can see in this room, all these people here, they're motivated, and I think this moment right here is the biggest moment right now in like the labor movement in a long time, and we're gonna go full force.
I couldn't agree more that there's been such a union bug, if you will, going around. You know, whether it be from just simply filing for election. I know as soon as my store filed, someone in this room right now reached out to us via email, as well as like 15 other people, and it just kept growing. And when it comes to direct action, I think that's really what we're trying to normalize at work right now. We're trying to normalize the word strike, normalize walkouts, because I think that's something that for so long we haven't really seen, at least in my generation. And so, you know, in a way, it's almost kind of good that we haven't seen this, because, you know, we don't have anything holding us back, really. I have a dear friend of mine who's been organizing in Seattle, and her store had not yet been certified, and they went on a ULP strike. She didn't know this, but she found out the next day that that was actually a very big deal. And she told me, I'm actually quite glad that I didn't know this, because had I known, I probably wouldn't have done it. And so I think in a way, you know, we're really pushing against what the status quo of organizing has been, but we don't really know that we're doing it. And I think that's been quite successful. And And really quick, just to explain what a ULP strike is a ULP stands for an unfair labor practice. So if your employer is violating the law when you're trying to unionize. But we've also had other types of strikes as well. In Boston, we had a store called Cleveland Circle. They went on strike because their ceiling had a leak. Apparently, it had been raining in their store for several years. But one day, it started raining even more, and the leak was just unbearable to the point where it was completely unsafe. The water was going all over their espresso machines, into people's drinks and their food. They actually, they showed me a picture of it, and the water was dark yellow. It was disgusting. And their manager just walked out in the middle of this and let them try to figure it out on their own. And the manager made a mistake and sent them all home that day, and all of their workers got together that day. And I got a phone call like halfway through, and they said, I think we want to strike. And it took less than 12 hours for us to get them all ready to go to strike. And I think that willingness to strike is because we've seen it happening now. Like, we're seeing other Starbucks stores do this. We're seeing these walkouts with Amazon, and we're thinking, hey, we can actually do something that will hurt our boss and make them listen to us. And right now, as we're filing more and more stores and we're preparing more and more stores, Howard Schultz just announced that they're not going to give benefits to stores that filed to unionize. Well, come August 1st, when those benefits come out, I think partners are going to be ready to take direct action. And I think that it's going to be a more wide-scale action than we've seen before because we feel empowered to do that now.
Derek, I wanted to ask you one more thing, picking up on what Mark said, which is that the independence from traditional labor movement can be important, sometimes in growing and radicalizing the labor movement. And obviously, you guys are an independent union, but as you were just saying, now you have thousands of people, warehouses reaching out to you guys, and you have limited resources. But I also know that you guys have been meeting with all of the largest the leaders of the largest unions in the country. So as you guys are scaling up and moving forward, how do you negotiate that? How do you draw the resources from the labor world that you need, but still stay independent?
We've met with like the Teamsters and UFCW. We met with a lot of different unions. So they're definitely supporting. As far as like resources and knowledge. And like negotiating contracts. So we definitely appreciate that support. And right now the plan is to stay independent. We're definitely not ruling out affiliating, in the future. But, right now we are going to stick to being independent for sure. But now we look at a larger scale, like, 100 different facilities, it's going to be overwhelming. It's going to be a challenge, but, we're up for it. And, again, we're not ruling affiliating out. Okay. All right.
I just wanted to add to that too, because we are affiliated, and as we grow, Workers United is actually quite a small union. As we grow, I think one of the most important things for us to remain in charge of it and to remain that worker-led is to remind them that what we're doing is successful. And in the past, the same traditional attempts to organize have started to lackluster. They're not as successful as they were, and so reminding the unions that we're working with that we are successful because we are leading it our way, and it has to remain that way in order to remain successful.
A question for Mark and Ruth. So at Starbucks and Amazon, obviously, as I said, and as you guys know, they've been using the NLRB as much as they want to, as much as they need to. And I'm curious if you guys have historical or other sorts of observations about, the pros and cons of that. Like, how much should we be engaging with and depending on labor law? Like, how much should we accept this sort of labor regime that, for the most part, has failed a lot of workers in recent decades? And how do you, as you're reading about and talking to Amazon and Starbucks workers, what are your observations about, okay, they have decided to do this, but not this, with regards to the NLRB or the Department of Labor, what have you? Ruth, do you want to start?
Whatever. I'll hold it closer this time, sorry. When you guys won at Staten Island, I watched on YouTube the final, hour or so of the NLRB counting the ballots. Maybe some of the rest of you did the same. And it was just surreal. There's this woman my age counting the ballots. Yes, no, yes. And then they recount every 50. I mean, it was just, and it was like, I don't know, some kind of time warp or something to me. And then, of course, I think, to be honest, probably most people in this room, I was completely stunned by the outcome. I mean, by the time I was watching it, I knew already that this was likely. But, 2 days before, I would have thought, this is hopeless, it's never going to happen. So, but I think it comes, so here, and it goes against the conventional wisdom, at least in my world, of not very long ago, that the NLRB was hopeless. If you wanted to organize, you had to do it some other way. This was not going to work, right? This is what many people have argued for the last couple decades. Sorry. And yet, I think it comes back to what Kyla said, that, it's good to not know too much when you're doing this, because if you had believed that, who knows what would have happened, right? And so, I mean, this is another side of being young, and it's a good one, that, you try things, you see what sticks to the wall. And so, anyway, I'm not really answering your question, but it's just very striking how, like, the disconnect between, that whole process and with all its creaky machinery. And luckily, there's a very good person at the head of the NLRB right now, so that's good. But yeah, but still, it's got its problems. We all know this, and yet you guys made it work along with lots of other things, obviously. So I think it's pretty amazing. Look, in the earlier upsurges that Mark was talking about, the law functioned a lot better, let's just say. I mean, people fought for those laws, and in the 1930s, it was helpful. Now it's more like you have to overcome the problems with it to win. But so maybe someday we'll have some renovation of those laws. But in the meantime, it's just amazing that you guys have made it work.
Yeah, I remember April 1st, my phone starts buzzing. I look at it, and there's Chris Smalls popping bottles in front of the NLRB. And I'm like, God damn, this is fucking amazing. I mean, it was just incredible. Look, I mean, I think it's important not to get too caught up in one tactic or another. I think, it's important in this stuff to be flexible. Look, we have labor laws in this country because people shut down production and occupied factories in the 1930s to get it. And the choice of the ruling class was essentially the Wagner Act or, the guillotine, basically. They were looking at the Soviet Union and thinking, okay, well, maybe we'll give them this. That'll be better than that. But that's often how we win it. We won the right to strike in the public sector through striking illegally in the public sector, right? And then as workers, we got to deal with those laws. And after that upsurge, business is there weakening those laws year after year after year and turning them against us. But going to the NLRB doesn't necessarily mean you're relying on the NLRB. The fundamental question that determines the balance of power is how much power we have in the shop organizationally. The boss has the means of production. We have organization. The NLRB is just an arena where it's one arena where that contest plays out. It's a tool in the toolbox. And again, these are rights, like Ruth pointed out, that workers fought for. As a working class, we fought for and won these rights. The right to strike, the right to concerted activity. It's important to fight for and defend those rights collectively in the workplace. That said, we shouldn't have illusions. And I don't know that ALU and Starbucks Workers United have illusions about the NLRB. I mean, they're certainly going through all kinds of legal shenanigans from the other side, but I think they're effectively using it as one tool in the toolbox. You win an election, you get the right to represent your coworkers in disciplinary meetings. You get the right to protect against unilateral changes from the employer. You get the right to information that you could never get if you didn't have certification. What you don't get automatically is the right to have a contract. The law doesn't say they have to sign a contract. That's based on our ability to force them to sign the contract. And so, I think, again, flexibility is important, but it's also important to see how this is being used and then teach that to other workers during this period.
Thank you for teeing up the question of a contract because, Starbucks and Amazon are still early. We don't have contracts yet. Derek and Kyla, what are your plans to get a first contract? Is that a priority for your organizations? Tell us about the steps that you're taking toward a contract.
Well, right now, we're just fighting for Amazon to recognize us as a union. So that's another battle that we're trying to overcome, as you can see, recognize ALU. But yeah, we're definitely gonna have some strikes in the future for sure to create that pressure. And like I said before, having these other facilities getting involved, organizing, that's the pressure right there. Just the fact that Amazon is making billions and billions of dollars. Imagine if their workers just stop working. They lose that power immediately, and they're gonna fold. It's gonna happen. So our plans are definitely to have walkouts for sure and get as many facilities involved with organizing as possible.
I think, right now at Starbucks, our CEO, Howard Schultz, has done a really good job at energizing us. Howard recently said that he will not engage with the union. That tells us right now that he doesn't want to engage in good faith bargaining as he's required to by law. So if he won't, I think that he's probably going to continue to, dig his heels into the ground. And by doing that, he's going to continue pissing us off. And we have over 150 stores that have unionized. Shut those down. I think it's incredibly important that we don't back down in our fight for a contract because I know that that's what Howard wants us to do. He wants us to give up. He wants to punish us by saying that we're not going to be eligible for certain benefits that other people will be now. And if this is going to be a years-long battle, that's fine, but it's going to run Starbucks into the ground, and that's going to be Howard's fault. But I think right now our priorities, of course we want a contract, but our priorities are to continue supporting each other through this process, empowering workers, teaching them what their rights are, teaching them what rights are maybe not the most helpful and what we should be, working to improve on and expand on. But I think that the most important thing right now is to continue energizing our base and continue, building this coalition of baristas. And I think we're doing a really good job at that. And I think one of the biggest things right now is to normalize the word strike because we're going to need to do it.
I'll just ask one last question before tossing it out to all of you guys. So please prepare your questions, and I'll come around with the mic. But for the four of you guys, so, one noteworthy thing about Amazon, Starbucks, also we haven't talked about some of the new tech campaigns, but Google, Apple, there's some incipient organizing there. These are multinational, transnational corporations, and we have an international gathering here at Labor Notes. And I'm wondering if you guys have observations on the international dimensions of this organizing. Starbucks is in every country, Amazon seemingly in every country, more and more. Are you guys getting calls from people abroad? What does that mean to you? For Ruth and Mark, in your unions, in your academic work, what have you studied, in terms of international solidarity that might provide lessons for these movements? So maybe we can just go down the row.
We've definitely been contacted by other unions, Amazon unions across the country, and I actually met with someone earlier at one of the other panels. So yeah, the plan is to definitely connect with them. Like, it would make no sense for us to just keep it in the U.S. You know, eventually we'd have to take it worldwide, and that's definitely the plan, for sure.
It's a challenge to organize across national boundaries, obviously. The earlier attempts to do it mostly have involved industries that are very mobile, manufacturing especially, where the threat is if you don't do this, that, you know, the factory's just going to move. That can't really happen in these industries. Amazon needs to be close to its customers, have the warehouses local to be able to deliver, you know, rapidly like they always promise. Starbucks obviously can't serve coffee in Singapore to people in New York or whatever. So I think that's a big plus. At the same time, obviously, people in other countries can learn from one another, and, you know, that's all to the good. I know in the case of Amazon, there is some success in Europe in the past in organizing, though obviously the framework is very different. But anyway. Oh, sorry.
I've had the great pleasure to meet partners from all over the nation, but I've also had an honor to meet folks organizing Starbucks stores in Brazil and Chile and Canada. Canada was actually very helpful to us because Starbucks likes to use them as an example during our captive audience sessions, because they like to say, oh, they have a contract that does this and this, like, you're going to have the same one. So it was really helpful to have those connections with Canada, because then we could help dispel the lies that Starbucks was spewing. I think that it's really important for us to work with other stores throughout the whole world, because we can learn so much from each other, and we can really scare our bosses this way too. And I think it's also really interesting to learn about all the different, you know, labor laws and the different approaches to organizing. I had no idea that in Brazil everyone just starts with a union, but they have to get a contract, you know? That's something that I think is really important for us to know, so that way when we're organizing, we have more of a global perspective as well.
Yeah, so our union, UE, has always stood for the idea that of internationalism, that our interests as a working class lie with, other workers throughout the world, not with our own government. And this is a question I think the labor movement's gotten better on in recent years. But, the reason we've always stood for that, well, there are many reasons. One is that that's how you have to win. I mean, these are global companies, like was pointed out. All of this work can be moved. When you talk about tech work, for example, that can easily be moved. When you talk about Amazon, it's a global supply chain. And in a lot of ways, it's been workers at Amazon in other countries who've really shown that you can strike this company and be successful. So, there have been really important strikes in Poland and Germany and Italy. So I think that illustrates, that those ties have to be made and they've got to be cultivated. And you can see at this conference, there are a lot of international guests here that folks should talk to and make those connections with.
Okay, so I'm going to come around with the mic. Please ask questions, don't make comments, and be prepared to say who you want the question directed to. So I'm going to come around.
Hi, my name is Amelia, she, her pronouns, and this question is sort of oh, yes, I can stand. I'm short. I don't know that it makes a difference. This question can kind of be for anyone, but I'm curious, we're talking about this upsurgence and also all of these other social movements that are going on, and so many of these companies, like Amazon, like a lot of these tech companies, are also hugely impacting these other issues, right? The catastrophic effects of climate change. And so how do we ensure that as we see this growth that, while we're fighting for things like better pay and better benefits, which obviously impact the individual, that we're also fighting for these global, important, bigger things, and how do we keep that also as a central focus and use the labor movement to move forward these larger fights?
Thank you, Amelia. So I think that when, Jazz Brizek, who was one of the Buffalo organizers, She said that when she first went, to unionize Starbucks, she thought, this is a very progressive corporation, right? They tell us all the time that they have these very progressive ideals and that they're committed to those values. So she thought, yeah, of course they're going to want to have a fair and just election process. They'll sign our petition to do this. Well, of course, we found out that's not true. And I think that something that's very important right now is that we hold Starbucks accountable to the missions that they proclaim to have, but also have them do more. One of the biggest things is that when it comes to waste, we are a huge contributor to that. I think there's ways that we can incorporate in our contract, how do we reduce waste? I think we should stop charging an extra $1 if you want oat milk. I think we should make that more accessible. I think that we should be actually committing to providing our partners the support they need for whatever social justice issues there are. I mean, I think Starbucks likes to say that they're committed to that. But when one of my partners wanted to wear a Black Lives Matter button to work, they were told they can't wear that. So it's things like this where I think it's very important that we use this contract not only to improve our wages and to improve our workplace rights, but to also make the world a better place through holding Starbucks accountable for that too.
Can I just add one point, which is, I'm sorry to keep coming back to the generational thing, but I'm kind of obsessed with it. But this is a generation whose worldview is central to it is the idea of intersectionality. That's been true for a long time before the union bug caught fire. And I think, at least from the union end or the labor movement end, we don't really have to worry about this becoming a narrow focus on wages and working conditions. At least I'm pretty confident that among this generation, it's even gone the other way in some cases where concerns about sexual harassment and whatnot have animated union campaigns and continue to. So I don't think that's quite our worry, although it's great that you raised it. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note, to bring it back to upsurges, that, the two big upsurges in the United States, 30s and the 60s, took place during the context of broader social movements that were fighting for bigger, bolder demands, really challenging the nature of the system we live under. And those were movements that, supported the worker upsurge. And so you really do need demands that are bigger and bolder, more audacious, but you also need to be linking up with other social movements and, figuring out how you can act together, especially because, these are companies that impact us on a whole range of different, issues.
We have a question over here. You okay, Derek? Okay. Your name and where you're from.
My name is Sam. I am currently working with Wesleyan Residential Life Union. And so I guess my question is directed towards all of you in different ways, in the sense that you guys talked a lot about this the new generation of union organizing and it coming from a place of youth. And so I guess my question is, do you think that with the surges we've seen in undergraduate organizing and graduate organizing and in kind of organization in the sense that it doesn't have to be a traditional workforce that we've seen in skilled work, does that mean that we have to redefine the workforce as a labor movement? Does that mean we have to kind of redefine the age where you enter the workforce, in the sense that we are seeing a surge in the sense that young people at even earlier ages than like at 16, at 18, are more willing to get involved in organizations? Does that mean we have to kind of, as a labor movement, redefine what that workforce is going to be like and who we're advocating for?
I feel like, honestly, like this generation right now of the youth is like can be the most impactful ever. Seriously. I just feel like all they need really is just the knowledge. As long as they have the knowledge to go about, about unionizing, they can make the most impact for sure. And I think, this is what's happening now. You have us, we're fairly young, and, we're making it happen. And I think that, this is something that other, like, people in our age bracket are doing. And they're inspired by it. They see, like you mentioned, Chris Smalls popping champagne, but, it's really about us having fun while we're doing it, and that's another thing. Like, we're having fun, you know, we're wearing what we want to wear, and we're talking to these workers, and we're fearless as well. Something that I would say, like, an older generation may have lacked that. But so I feel like now is the time that we have to really take advantage of that, and I only think it's going to be, you know, people even younger than us are going to follow in our path and continue to, you know, to change the world ultimately, because that's the goal.
I remember when I first started helping out other stores that wanted to unionize, I got an email from 2 high school students, both juniors, 17 years old, literally my youngest sister's age. And I just couldn't get over it. I was so inspired by them because I could not imagine doing that at 17 years old because, again, I didn't know what a union was. So I think that was really cool to see. And I think we're seeing so many younger folks get involved because they're passionate about helping others and they're passionate about the intersectionality of all these issues, and they know that they can make a change in their workplace too. I don't necessarily think that means that we have to redefine what the labor force is or actively do that, because I think definitions kind of evolve and change over time. But something that I do see is that even the youngest of the organizers are thinking about the oldest of their coworkers too. We're thinking, how can we make this contract and this work for everybody, not just our generation, but everybody.
Just a quick reminder that the profile of the existing unionized workforce in this country skews old. Like 45 to 54 is the most unionized population. People under 25 are the least unionized right now. This is changing, fortunately. But so it is a change that way. I'm not sure it represents a change in the workforce per se. Like the labor force has changed already to be a much more service sector focused thing, and that is actually advantageous to organizing, because the stuff that can leave has mostly already left, as Dan Clausen pointed out long ago, by the way, in that same book.
No, you guys.
Okay. You're in the back.
Hi, my name is Zach. I'm from the Bay Area in California. My question is for Kyla. I recall seeing all the Starbucks stores organizing in kind of like a wild wave that I did not fully understand and am very excited by. But I'm kind of curious, like, where your store fell in that wave. Like, were you in the beginning, or did it kind of hit and then you kind of like talked about it? I just kind of want to like understand how that started at your store, kind of in relation to the bigger picture.
Yeah. So my store was the 3rd city to open up to unionizing. So it started with Buffalo and then Mesa, Arizona. My store was ready to file sooner, but we actually purposely waited until right after Buffalo's union elections were called because we knew the momentum would be really good at that moment. So we filed December 13th, I believe. And so that was pretty early in. We opened up the 3rd city to do it, and we won our election in April 11th or something. And I think part of that wave, it was scary because the wave hadn't gotten that big yet. There were only, I remember when the group chat was so small, and that was all the workers who had been doing it, and now there's hundreds of people in our group chats. So I think there was something a little bit scary about it for my coworkers, and I, to this day, am just so proud of them for signing their cards. I will cry if I think about it because I know that it was scary. But as soon as we filed, we just had so many other people who wanted to join in. It caught up so fast. And I think that made us feel like we weren't alone, and it made it easier for us to build that momentum. But I'm just, to this day, I'm just so thankful for my coworkers who are willing to take that risk.
Hi there. My name is Gurjeet. I'm from Naujawan Support Network. So we confront employers who exploit their employees. And the thing we're facing defamation lawsuits from them, from the employers. Do you guys face anything similar to that, or how do you respond to it?
to any of you guys. The defamation laws in other countries obviously differ quite a bit, but I have seen attacks on First Amendment rights here, right, from employers. So yeah, Mark, do you want to start?
Yeah, we got a couple of those defamation lawsuits, but I mean, a lot of times that means I mean, they're doing that because you're being successful. On the other hand, it sort of points to the issue that unions are institutions and have a lot to lose when challenging employers, right? And there's money, there's treasuries, there's buildings, there's all kinds of stuff, pension funds. What it means is that it makes it harder for unions sometimes to take the risks that we need to take in moments like this, which sort of speaks to the reason why sometimes you need other things happening and other folks willing to help out with that stuff, because many unions are not prepared to break the law and violate injunctions or do sit-down strikes or that kind of thing. And in a lot of cases, that's what's needed to turn a moment into an upsurge is stuff like that.
And I would also add, we don't have the same issue for Starbucks workers right now in terms of defamation, but something I have learned is sometimes to wait before you ask your attorneys whether or not to do something.
Ask the attorney. Don't call the lawyer. Right.
And I say this as someone who's sitting for the bar in July. And I want to say that as someone who's going to be a lawyer, it is so crucial that lawyers engage in movement lawyering, in lawyering that's not afraid to break the laws, in lawyering that's not afraid to challenge the status quo. Ultimately, that's the only way we're going to see change, is if we're willing to push against the laws that are currently in place.
Hi. Oh, wait, one more. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, all those ULPs that we filed, were successful. So I just feel like it's important to have, lawyers present with you, while you're organizing, because that really helped out a lot. Just wanted to add that.
Hi, my name is Madison. I'm an organizer with Warehouse Workers for Justice, which is a nonprofit worker center here in Illinois, and an active member of the Chicago News Guild. I just want to say first, thank you so much to all of the panelists. It's really such an inspiration to hear from you all about the work and to hear about how the labor movement is growing and scaling up. So this question is for Mark, because I'm sure many organizers here can relate to the experience of burnout and the toll that really takes on your health, your campaign, and ultimately the organization. So how do you think we can support the organizers doing this important work to be able to fully take advantage of this crucial and historical moment?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, being a paid staff organizer, is an important thing. It's a relatively new phenomenon in the global labor movement. And in part, unions have taken on this idea that we have to have a lot of staff in order to do the organizing. And, if you go back to the 90s, when a lot of us were trained on organizing methodology, the idea, and it's a good idea, that you have to do a lot of home visits and you have to assess a lot of workers and you have to do all the rigorous mapping and stuff like that, is also kind of predicated on the idea that we need a lot of staff to do it. But we also saw a lot of staff get churned and burned during that period too. And in some cases, organizers not being supported by their organizations. And we need to do that. We need to take affirmative steps to support all the people who work for our organizations, including Warehouse Workers for Justice. I think we also need to recognize that this thing is not going to get built on staff. This was one of the reasons we started the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, EWOC, as a joint project. Yep, give it up. Because we're going to need to harness the power of thousands and thousands of volunteers who are interested in helping workers organize in their workplaces. And EWOC is one way to do it. We took the distributed organizing model that had just been used on the Bernie campaign and said, let's apply this to workplace organizing. And there's been thousands of people who've helped out with organizing campaigns that have come through EWOC. We need structures like that. And in many ways, we need to look at the staff role as really helping to facilitate those structures that allow us to engage a lot of volunteers. It's really instructive that ALU didn't have any staff. Starbucks Workers United, it's not Workers United staff going out there and organizing these shops. It's workers doing it, right? We got to remember that, right? And remember that that is where this happens, right? And staff play a supporting role in that process.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm with Radical Women, a socialist feminist organization, and I live in Seattle, the home of Amazon and Starbucks, and I've been on some Starbucks picket lines. It's been great, and I would like to, something I wonder about is, it seems like the people involved in this organizing or these work groups are tend to be more women, LGBT, people of color, and those are the people who are very much leading these uprisings, and I just wondered if you could speak to the role of gender and race in the organizing that's been going on. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining the picket lines over in Seattle. As I mentioned earlier, my friend Sarah's over there and led the first strike without knowing it was going to be a big deal. And now they're on strikes all the time over there. I think that, kind of going back to what we've been talking about, earlier is that the rug has been pulled from us. Our generation has had to face a lot of issues. And so I think that one of the reasons why we're unionizing, obviously we want better pay. Obviously we want better working conditions and benefits. But there's something so much bigger that we're fighting for. And so I think that's why you're seeing so many women, so many people of color, so many LGBTQIA plus members, leading these, because they're the ones that are impacted by this injustice. And I think that is also, again, going back to why this has been so successful, is because it's those workers who are at the forefront of it. It's the workers who can speak to that and can attest to what their needs are. And we're getting the support we need from our allies and our coworkers to support and lift those folks up.
I just want to add that I think it's related to what Mark pointed out before, that what we're seeing now is inflected by broader social movements. So I don't know if this is on everybody's radar, but Black Lives Matter is another example of a movement where the leadership was disproportionately female, also college educated, also disproportionately queer, self-identified as queer, so this is not an accident. Like, people who are oppressed in other ways are more sensitive to social justice concerns and more likely to become mobilized in these kind of campaigns. I was very struck by the panel of Starbucks workers right before this one in this room, where I think there were 2 men and 7 women or something. And, I actually didn't know that about the Starbucks campaign until today. But now Amazon is a little different, partly because the workforce is much more male, maybe. But it's very, people of color are very prominent in that movement. So, it's not an accident, is all I would say. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, when you look at these Amazon facilities, they're majority black and brown. So, they're bringing these big warehouses into these urban areas, and they're having black and brown workers, members of the LGBT community as well, are affected the most. So I think that it's only fitting that they're leading the charge and they're standing up because they want change.
Hi, my name's Peggy Wang. I'm an educator in Boston and also a member of the Independent Socialist Group. I wanted to bring up, so sometimes it sounds like separate fights, like we're fighting Starbucks, we're fighting Amazon, but you all are all talking about workers and the working class as being so essential to winning these. So as you know, we're talking about this, like, how do we stand in solidarity with one another? Like, these fights are all our fights, and so I'm curious, when you're thinking about this, how do we link up and support each other? And is it time? You know, our issues are very similar. Universal health care pay. Is it time for a mass workers' party?
I think that's a really good question. I think on a day-to-day, we're fighting Starbucks, right? That's like something I'm thinking about every day, is what is Howard going to do next, and how do we beat him at that? But in the broader scale, we're constantly thinking about workers as a whole. You know, I can tell you that I had no idea what I was getting into when my store filed, and I didn't understand the broad impact it could have on workers. But as we've continued to push through this movement and grow, it's become apparent that this has the opportunity, along with ALU and all of these other huge, you know, unionization efforts. We are fighting for all workers right now, and I think that's something that's constantly in the bigger picture that we're looking at. And I think it's so important that, you know, as you said, and as Mark had said too, about, you know, getting together with these left organizations and finding ways to get support from them as well. I just think it's super crucial that we all find a way to come together. And I hear you're from Boston, so I will have to link up with you after this to get you connected to our campaign there too.
Yeah, you know, like I mentioned earlier, like this is like probably the biggest moment in labor history, really. So we definitely all need to support each other, you know, and that's why ALU supporting Starbucks supporting us, and you know, we're just going to continue to support all workers who want to get involved with organizing, because I can't stress how important this moment is, and I don't want this to just fade away. You know, I want this to stay relevant forever. Like, I want my kids to talk about this, because that's, you know, that is the goal. And, you know, workers coming together, worker power is so powerful, man, I swear. And that's what these billionaires are really afraid of. That's why they're spending these millions of dollars to stop our campaigns.
And it is snowballing. I mean, so it's Amazon, Starbucks, Apple, REI, more. You know, it's spreading. So I think, you know, you're right. Obviously, each campaign has to fight its own fight, but I think this is not. People recognize the universality of these issues, as again, especially young workers in these sectors. Do you want to add?
Mark, do you have thoughts on the party aspect?
I mean, it's been time for a workers' party in this country, right? I mean, our organization's always stood for the idea that we need a labor party in this country, because for reasons I think we all know. But you know, how we get there in part is really through what we're doing here. And even, you know, every labor struggle has a target, and usually it's going to be the employer. So yeah, these are struggles directed at those employers. But you know, we're getting more organizing leads than we've ever gotten, as are, I think, most unions right now. It's clear that something's happening in the broader working class, right? And it's clear that people are paying attention to these fights and other fights out there. So that shows that, yeah, this is a broader class-wide question here, and we've got to treat it that way. There's an upsurge doesn't happen just around one or two companies. It happens around the entire working class moving together.
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is John Ferretti. I'm a member of a 40,000 plus member train and bus workers union in New York City. And the way I know Derek Palmer and Jordan Flowers and Chris Smalls is when they organized their walkout, I was out there on the picket lines and the May Day protest, building solidarity with them. And I was elected to the executive board of this union as an open socialist, calling for the kind of labor solidarity and class struggle that they believe in and that we proved in practice works. But I think that, the elephant in the room here is the labor bureaucracy, is the fact that when I was in a conversation before the meeting, Derek, I hope this is okay for me to share this, you weren't invited to the AFL-CIO convention. One of the most successful union organizing drives in the history of this country, they didn't get an invite to come to the AFL-CIO convention. And so ultimately, when you were talking about earlier about Starbucks workers and making it not acceptable to be a union buster, well, the labor bureaucracy, the pro-ruling class, traitorous labor bureaucracy of this country, have been sitting on the sidelines eating popcorn while Chris Smalls is getting fired, while other Starbucks workers have been fired. How do we make it unacceptable? How do we make demands on these union leaders to expose them? Because they are not the leadership that we need, and the voices of your workers need to be heard at the highest levels of the unions in this country. And unless that changes, we have creeping fascism around the corner.
Mark, do you want to start?
The
Because
questions
UE
from
is an
some of our
independent
left-wing
union,
friends.
right?
All right, the UE guy's got to answer this one again. What was the question again? Oh, the labor bureaucracy. Yeah. So, I mean, look, yeah, that's a long topic. I mean, we're in the UE. We're a different set of circumstances that we're dealing with. But, I mean, I think, again, you've seen in, first of all, you're seeing movements within unions right now to assert member control, right? You're seeing, new leadership in some unions coming to the fore with different ideas. I think we still need a class struggle or some kind of left pole within the U.S. labor movement that has more cohesion, that can actually move a program within the labor movement along the lines that was done, with the Trade Union Education League way back in the 1920s. I don't know whether we'll get there or not, but I do know that, look, the main fight is against the boss, okay? It's not against the labor bureaucracy. The labor bureaucracy can stand in the way, and they're gonna catch some bullets during that fight, right? But that main fight is against the boss, right? And, when we're talking about 6% private sector density, it's really going to be the unorganized working class that rises up here. I don't think we should expect a whole lot from the mainstream of the U.S. labor movement, unfortunately. That doesn't mean we shouldn't put demands on them, and we shouldn't set those expectations. And there are some unions that will really surprise us, okay? There are a lot of people, left, right, and center, within the labor movement who are thinking about this right now. And, frankly, we've tried everything in the U.S. labor movement to revitalize the labor movement. We've tried all kinds of different strategies over the last, 30 years. We've tried a new federation. We've tried corporate campaigns. We've tried, staff-driven organizing. We've tried a whole bunch of things, including our own union. This is the stuff that actually builds the trade union movement. It's Upsurge. And so at some point, the working class has to take that charge, and the leadership of the labor movement is going to do what it's going to do. Some folks will get out ahead and make it happen. Others may not, just like in prior upsurges, right? And we should expect that, but we should still make demands and hold people accountable too.
Hi, my name is Megan Swabda. I'm with the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, and this question is for everyone. Thank you. So I guess it actually leads off of the question, what you just said, Mark, right? So what should we in this room do if we are in this moment where we could potentially, we don't know, right, but potentially be in a moment of upsurge? What do we as people who are organizers, who are active in our unions, who are elected, who are just volunteers, who are just trying to figure out what to do, what should we do to decide that we want this to be a moment of upsurge and take action?
So I'm going to quote some Starbucks corporate language for you all. because I love to use their language against them. But Starbucks value number 2 is to be courageous and to challenge the status quo. I do expect that they'll probably rewrite that soon, but I think that, kind of going off of that last question as well and moving into this, is that it's so important to recognize that a lot of the success right now is because we have been challenging the status quo, whether we know it or not, too. And I think that supporting us through that is incredibly important, and empowering us through that, and I guess essentially being open to different ways of organizing, being open to different approaches that, are starting to pop up right now, because I think that a lot of us are following our intuition and it's working, and there's got to be a reason for that. So I think that the best way to support right now is to continue kind of being at the picket line, supporting those workers who are at the forefront of these big movements, Apple, Verizon, ALU. I mean, these folks need as much support from their community as possible, because, I'll be honest, there were some really tough days at work. And I was just thankful for our regulars that came in and told us that they were really proud of us and that they thought it was so cool what we're doing. I think that's one way to support us.
I'll just quote another famous saying that I can't improve on: educate, agitate, organize. That's all we can do.
To add to that, I would just pretty much say that we would want traditional unions to be more, open to criticism from independent, and also vice versa. I feel like the way we keep the movement going is learning from each other. Because if we're still stuck in our ways, thinking that we're going to get everything done by not listening to someone else who may have the answer, I think that would be detrimental to the movement. So, again, learning from traditional unions learning from independent, to keep the movement going strong, and I think that's the future. And I think the way that we won, by being independent, by being unorthodox, by being slept on, was a wake-up call for the labor movement, and it's only going to get better.
Okay. Unfortunately, this is our last question.
Hi, my name is Brandon. I'm with SEIU Fight for 15. And I feel like the last couple of questions, this is what I think about all the time, because I do have a big union with me, with real backing, and I've been there for 2 months now, so it's young, but I'm trying to build out what I really want it to be. And so my real question is what do you want us to do as big unions? People say support. Yeah, that's what? What would really be helpful for you? What do you really want from the big unions that would really do something in this moment?
I mean, I could send you a budget and a proposal.
That was what I was going to say.
So
Mark took the words right out of my mouth. Ultimately, I think that what we need is support through resources, and that's not resources like staffers. I recently read a Twitter thread where somebody said that SEIU sent a bunch of staffers to organize Starbucks. That's not true. And if that were true, I don't think it would be as productive, because I think that the workers need to be at the forefront of all of this. And to keep them at the forefront, we need resources. Starbucks, Amazon, they're spending billions of dollars to try to beat this campaign. And we need billions of dollars to do the same. We need to be able to help our coworkers. We need strike funds. We're super fortunate to just have gotten $1 million strike fund with the help of Workers United and SEIU, but we need more than that, because if we're going to get a contract, we're going to need to strike for a while. So I think ultimately, financially, that is the best way that these big unions can help us. On the community level, I think it's talking to the workers. And if they're not organized yet, start asking them about their working conditions, because I can guarantee you, once people start thinking about their working conditions in more detail and start challenging what we've been told to accept, you'll get more people to add on to that campaign as well.
I mean, the 6% private density notwithstanding, the established unions do have a lot of money still and a lot of expertise that could be helpful to this. And the danger, of course, is that they try to take over, which is what. So I don't know. The metaphor for me is like this is a garden with some beautiful flowers that have to be watered and not crushed. But we need the water and we need other resources. So.
As far as like the established unions, I would definitely encourage them, to donate funds, because it was definitely hard organizing, independently, for sure. But more importantly, I would just say for established unions, like for example, our WDSU, they are an established union. So one of the things that we thought that they can improve on was just being more engaged with the workers. When they got their authorization cards signed, they were kind of a little laid back leading up to the election. In Alabama. But yeah, I just think that talking to workers directly, like the approach that we took, like literally asking them questions, like what do they want changes, like what changes do they want, is the most important thing. Learning from them, hearing their approaches, and listening to independent unions and their unorthodox approaches. Like for example, us, we did barbecues, we passed out T-shirts, we set up in the break rooms at work on our break times, and we came into work to organize on our days off. And that sacrifice, that dedication, it speaks volumes. And going the extra mile is most important. So I think that they should learn from that.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for coming to this panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists once more. And I'm sure that, if you guys want to cut a check, they're here to take them. So thank you. Enjoy your next session.